The temple is silent in the hour before dawn, and it is precisely this silence that the priest has learnt, across many years, to love above almost every other part of his day. He wakes inside the modest stone chamber attached to the temple's outer wall, a room kept deliberately bare, a woven mat, a low chest holding his linen garments, a small niche in the wall where a single oil lamp burns low and steady through the night, its flame so faithful and so unwavering that he sometimes thinks of it as another kind of breathing, patient and constant, asking nothing of him except that it eventually be refilled. He does not rise the moment his eyes open. There is a discipline in that pause, a discipline every priest of this temple learns early in training and never fully stops practicing, because the mind that rushes from sleep into motion carries the disorder of dreams with it into the day's first rites, and the first rites of the morning are not meant to be disordered. So he lies still, listening to the particular quality of pre-dawn darkness pressing against the small high window of his chamber, a darkness that is beginning, almost imperceptibly, to lose its total density, to admit the faintest suggestion that somewhere beyond the western desert, beyond the black silhouette of the hills, the sun is already gathering itself for its long climb back into the visible world. In these unhurried minutes, he lets his mind move slowly across the shape of the coming day, not with any anxiety, but with the particular calm anticipation of a man whose days have followed nearly the same pattern for so many years that anticipation itself has become a kind of comfort rather than a kind of tension. He thinks of the seal on the sanctuary door, whole and unbroken as it was when he pressed it there himself the previous evening, and of the small private satisfaction that will come, as it comes every single morning, from finding it exactly so. He thinks, briefly, and without any particular urgency, of the state of the temple's grain stores, a matter he will need to review with the chief scribe before midday, and of a minor dispute between two tenant farmers over a shared irrigation channel that will likely require his attention before the week is out. None of these thoughts arrive with any weight. They simply pass through him the way the first pale light is now beginning to pass, slowly and without insistence, across the small high window above his sleeping mat. He becomes aware, gradually, of the particular texture of the linen beneath him, worn soft by years of washing, and of the faint lingering scent of the previous evening's incense still clinging to the folds of the light blanket drawn over his legs, a scent so continuously present throughout his entire adult life that he has long since stopped being able to imagine what the ordinary, unscented air of the wider world beyond the temple walls must actually smell like to someone encountering incense for the first time. The lamp in its niche flickers very slightly, some faint stirring of air finding its way even into this well-sealed room, and he watches the small movement of the flame with the same unfocused attention he gives to most things in this quiet hour, before, at last, with no particular signal beyond his own internal sense that the appropriate moment has arrived, he sits up. The mud brick walls of his chamber hold the day's warmth long into the night, releasing it slowly enough that even now, in the coldest hour before sunrise, the room carries a faint residual comfort, a warmth stored the way a stone holds the memory of a fire long after the fire itself has gone out. He can hear, faintly, the temple beginning to stir beyond his own walls, sandaled feet moving with the particular soft-footed care that temple protocol demands even in the deep quiet of early morning, water being poured somewhere into a stone basin, a door swinging on a well-oiled hinge, without so much as a creak, because creaking hinges are attended to immediately in this temple, considered an offense against the reverent hush that the god's house is meant to maintain at every hour. When he finally rises, he does so slowly, unwinding himself from his sleeping linen with the unhurried care of a man for whom haste has become, over years of practice, almost physically uncomfortable. He crosses to the small basin of water left for him the previous evening, and the water, though it has sat overnight, still carries a faint coolness that startles his palms pleasantly awake as he washes his face, his hands, his forearms, murmuring beneath his breath the small private words of purification that every priest speaks before touching anything belonging to the god's daily service. Words so worn into memory by repetition that he no longer thinks about their individual meaning any more than a person thinks about the individual meaning of their own heartbeat. He dresses in fresh linen, white and finely woven, the fabric cool and slightly stiff against his skin in these first moments before his own warmth softens it. And he takes care, as he always takes care, that every fold falls correctly, that no wrinkle or stray thread offends the precise visual order the temple requires of everyone who serves within its walls. He runs a hand once more over his shaved scalp, checking by touch alone that no trace of stubble has returned overnight, since even this smallest departure from prescribed purity would, by the temple's exacting standard, be considered unfit for approaching the god's presence, and satisfied that all is correct, he ties the simple leopard skin sash, reserved for senior priests, across one shoulder, its worn spots and faded patches, telling their own quiet history of exactly how many mornings it has already accompanied him through this same unvarying sequence. Purity here is not merely a spiritual abstraction. It is a physical, daily, endlessly repeated practice. Clean linen, a freshly shaved head and face, a body washed not once but several times throughout the day, because the god's presence, however invisible, is understood to demand a cleanliness that ordinary daily life, with its dust and its sweat and its unavoidable contact with the wider world, constantly threatens to disturb. He steps out from his chamber into the temple's outer court, just as the sky above the enclosure wall has begun, at last, to soften from black into the deep blue-grey that precedes true colour, and he pauses there for a moment, simply to feel the air. Cooler now than it will be at any other point in the coming day, carrying the faint mineral scent of stone and river silt and, beneath both, the ever-present dry perfume of desert sand drifting in from beyond the cultivated land. Somewhere beyond the temple's high walls, the Nile moves in its wide, patient course, invisible from here, but never entirely out of mind. Its presence felt less as a sight than as a kind of ambient certainty underlying everything else in this landscape. The reason the fields exist, the reason the temple itself was built exactly here, on this particular strip of land the river has blessed for longer than anyone can remember with certainty. He crosses the outer court toward the row of storerooms where the temple's daily offerings are prepared, passing beneath a row of columns whose capitals, carved in the shape of papyrus buds, not yet opened, catch the day's very first weak light along their upper curves, while their lower halves remain still deep in shadow. This particular half-light, neither night nor day, is the priest's favorite hour of the entire cycle. The hour when the temple feels most fully like a threshold rather than simply a building, a place genuinely suspended between the world of ordinary human time and the older, slower time the god is understood to inhabit. Inside the storeroom, the temple's junior attendants are already at work, several of them still yawning, moving between large sealed jars of grain and oil, baskets of bread loaves baked fresh before dawn in the temple's own ovens, bundles of fresh vegetables brought in daily from the temple's own cultivated land along the riverbank. The priest inspects a portion of this morning's bread, breaking a small piece from one loaf simply to feel its warmth and texture, satisfied by the particular give of good bread not yet cooled, and nods to the head baker, an older woman who has overseen this exact task for longer than the priest himself has served in the temple, her hands moving with the certainty of someone who could perform this labor blind if the ovens themselves ever failed her. He selects, alongside two junior priests trained specifically in this daily task, the offerings that will be carried into the sanctuary itself for the god's first meal of the day: bread, a small jar of beer, a portion of meat, prepared the previous evening. A handful of fresh vegetables, still faintly damp from the morning's watering. The two junior priests move with the particular careful precision of men who understand that even the smallest error in this selection, a loaf slightly misshapen, a vegetable with even a small blemish, would be considered an offense against the exacting standard the God's table is understood to require. And the priest watches their work with the quiet, approving attention of someone who once, many years earlier, performed this exact task himself under the same watchful eye of an older priest, now long dead, whose careful instructions he still hears sometimes in memory when he corrects a similar small error in the men now serving under him. One of the two, still new enough to his duties that his hands have not yet lost their nervousness, hesitates over a choice between two nearly identical jars of beer, uncertain which the ritual calendar specifies for this particular day within the lunar month. And the priest resolves the small uncertainty with a single quiet word, watching the young man's shoulders visibly ease at having the decision confirmed rather than left to his own judgment. This too is part of the temple's daily rhythm. This constant quiet correction and reassurance passed down from the more experienced to the less experienced, an unspoken apprenticeship continuing alongside the more formal ritual training every junior priest receives. Each generation absorbing not only the words of the rites, but the specific, exacting texture of doing them correctly, learned by proximity and repetition, far more than by any single moment of explicit instruction. This ritual, repeated every single morning without exception, without variation regardless of season or circumstance, forms the true, unbroken backbone of the temple's entire existence. Wars might pass beyond the temple's walls. Floods might rise higher or lower than any season in memory. None of it interrupts this specific, small, endlessly repeated act of preparing a god's breakfast, because the priest has been taught and believes with the same unshakable quiet certainty with which he believes in the reliability of his own breathing, that the god's continued goodwill toward the land depends entirely on this uninterrupted daily attention, that the world itself remains ordered only because someone, every single morning without fail, performs exactly this task, exactly on time. The procession toward the inner sanctuary begins as the sun finally clears the eastern horizon, its first true light striking the temple's outermost pylon and beginning its slow crawl across the open forecourt, illuminating the tall standing statues of past kings that flank the approach, their stone faces catching gold along their carved eyes and lips in a way that makes them appear, for just a few brief minutes each morning, almost to be waking themselves alongside the living. The priest walks at a measured pace, neither hurried nor dawdling, the two junior priests behind him carrying the offerings on wide flat trays held level and steady. And the small procession moves from the bright, sun-washed outer court into progressively darker, cooler, narrower spaces. As they proceed deeper into the temple's architecture, each successive hall smaller than the one before it, each threshold requiring a slight downward step, the ceiling lowering slightly with every hall passed, an architecture deliberately designed to make the visitor feel, with each step forward, the sensation of moving deeper into something both smaller and vastly older than the ordinary daylight world left behind at the entrance. He passes, in the second of these successive halls, a row of painted columns whose lower registers depict the king making offerings to the god in a scene repeated, with only minor variation, on nearly every wall of the temple's interior, an image so familiar to the priest that he no longer truly sees its individual details each time he passes. The way a man no longer truly sees the specific grain of a door he has opened every day of his adult life, and yet on certain mornings, when the light strikes the painted surfaces at a particular angle, some small, previously unnoticed detail will suddenly catch his eye: a fold in a painted garment, the specific tilt of a painted hand offering incense, and he will pause, briefly, struck anew by a scene he has passed 1,000 times before, as though the temple itself occasionally chose to remind him that true familiarity is never actually complete, that there is always some further layer of attention still available to whoever remains willing to look closely enough. The third hall is smaller still, its ceiling low enough that even the priest, of only modest height, must be conscious of the stone lintels marking each successive doorway, and here the incense grows noticeably thicker in the air, the accumulated residue of centuries of burning settled so deeply into the stone that the walls themselves seem, in the dim light, to have darkened permanently toward a deep smoky umber wherever the smoke has been allowed, over generations, to drift and settle. The junior priests behind him have grown entirely silent by this point in the procession, their earlier soft footsteps now barely audible at all, both of them having absorbed, through years of training, the same instinctive hush that overtakes nearly everyone who passes this deep into the temple's architecture, an involuntary quieting that has less to do with any spoken rule and more to do with the simple accumulated weight of the space itself pressing gently against ordinary human noise. By the time they reach the sanctuary's outermost antechamber, the light of morning has been reduced to only the faintest glow filtering through small, high clerestory openings, and the air itself has changed cooler, heavier, carrying the accumulated fragrance of years of burned incense soaked permanently into the very stone of the walls. A scent the priest has breathed so many thousands of mornings that he no longer consciously registers it as scent at all, only as the particular atmosphere of nearness to the god, indistinguishable now from the feeling of reverence itself. He pauses at the sanctuary's final sealed door, the innermost threshold that only he, among everyone currently serving in the temple this season, is permitted to cross. This is the moment his training was built entirely around, the single daily act that defines his entire vocation more completely than any other duty he performs across the remainder of his day. He breaks the clay seal placed across the door's bronze bolts the previous evening, a seal whose unbroken state each morning confirms that no unauthorized presence has disturbed the sanctuary overnight. And he draws back the bolts slowly, the sound of metal against metal swallowed almost entirely by the thick surrounding stone. Inside, in near total darkness, relieved only by a single small lamp he carries himself, stands the shrine housing the god's cult image, a modest gilded form far smaller than most visitors to the temple would ever imagine, hidden always from every eye but his own, and a small handful of the most senior priests. The lamp's small flame throws long, shifting shadows across the shrine's gilded surface as he approaches, the gold catching and releasing the light in slow, uneven pulses. And for a moment, as always, he simply stands before it in silence, allowing his own breathing to settle fully before beginning the sequence of acts that must follow in their exact, unvarying order. He performs the morning rite exactly as it has been performed every morning for longer than living memory can trace, unsealing the shrine itself, removing the previous day's now stale offerings, washing the image with water carried specifically for this purpose, anointing it with scented oil, dressing it in fresh linen, selected with the same exacting care he applied to his own garments hours earlier, and finally presenting the fresh offerings of bread, beer, meat, and vegetables, speaking the ancient formulas of praise and awakening in a low, steady voice that fills the tiny stone chamber with a resonance far larger than the space itself would seem to allow. The washing itself takes longer than a casual observer might expect, each small gesture deliberate, unhurried, performed with the same careful attention a mother might give to washing a sleeping child, without waking it. Water poured in a thin, controlled stream from a small vessel, a soft cloth passed slowly across the gilded surface, every motion accompanied by a corresponding line of spoken formula, the words and the actions so thoroughly fused after years of practice that the priest could not have separated one from the other, even if asked to try. The oil, when he applies it, carries its own particular fragrance, a blend of resins brought from lands far beyond the valley, and this scent, more than any other single sensation in his entire day, has become for him the truest signal of the sacred, more immediate even than the sight of the shrine itself, so that on the rare occasions he has caught the same fragrance somewhere else entirely, in a market stall or a stranger's home, he has felt, for just an instant, the same involuntary settling of attention that he feels here every morning. Dressing the image in fresh linen requires a particular delicacy, folding the fine cloth around the small gilded form exactly as prescribed. No fold out of place, no edge left uneven, and once this is done, he stands back very slightly to confirm the whole effect is correct before proceeding to the final and most important act of the rite, the presentation of the food itself, arranged with care on a small offering table before the shrine, the bread placed just so, the beer jar positioned at precisely the angle tradition specifies, the meat and vegetables arranged around them in a pattern that has not varied, so far as anyone in the temple's long institutional memory can attest, across an uncountable number of mornings stretching back farther than any single dynasty's records reliably reach. As he speaks the final words of praise, his own voice sounds unfamiliar to him, in a way it never quite stops sounding unfamiliar. Deeper and steadier than his ordinary speaking voice, shaped by the specific acoustics of this small enclosed chamber into something that seems to arrive from slightly outside himself. And he has come, across many years, to understand this small daily strangeness, not as anything to be resolved, but simply as further confirmation that this particular hour of his day belongs to a register of experience genuinely separate from the ordinary texture of the rest of his waking life. There is no audience for this moment. No crowd witnesses it, no grand ceremony surrounds it, and this, the priest has come to understand across years of performing it, is precisely the point. The temple's vast columned halls and towering pylons exist for the public eye, for festivals and processions the wider population will someday witness and celebrate. But the actual center of the entire institution, the small dark act this whole enormous structure has been built around, happens here in near total privacy, witnessed by no one but the priest himself and the God he serves. And it is this daily hidden faithfulness, rather than any public spectacle, that he has been taught to understand as the true engine keeping the larger order of the world correctly balanced. He reseals the shrine once the offering is complete, backing out of the sanctuary's innermost chamber with the same measured reverence with which he entered, sweeping his own footprints from the floor's fine sand with a small palm frond broom kept specifically for this purpose, so that no trace remains to suggest any mortal presence had ever crossed this threshold at all. The door is bolted again behind him, sealed once more with fresh clay, and the small procession makes its way back out through the temple's successive halls, the light growing steadily stronger, the air steadily warmer, as they emerge finally back into the outer court, now fully bathed in the strong, clear light of a Nile Valley morning well underway. The middle hours of the day belong to the temple's wider, more practical business, and here the priest's role shifts considerably, from solitary ritual specialist to something closer to an administrator overseeing a substantial and complex household. The temple owns land along the river, orchards and grain fields worked by tenant farmers who owe a portion of their harvest to the temple's storehouses, and a portion of every morning is spent reviewing accounts with the temple's scribes, men seated cross-legged in a shaded colonnade, papyrus scrolls and wooden writing boards spread before them, recording deliveries of grain, oil, cattle, cloth, all of it destined to support not only the god's daily offerings, but the considerable staff required to keep the entire institution functioning, from bakers to weavers to the small army of junior priests, singers, and musicians who serve on rotating duty throughout the year. The chief scribe, a thin, precise man whose fingers are permanently stained faintly grey from years of handling ink, unrolls the relevant papyrus across a low table set in the colonnade's cool shade, and the two of them work through the morning's accounts together, with the particular unhurried thoroughness the temple's considerable holdings require. Grain deliveries from 3 separate tenant farms are recorded in careful columns, measured against the amounts owed according to agreements, some of which predate the priest's own arrival at the temple by several decades, and he listens as the scribe reads each figure aloud, occasionally asking a clarifying question about a delivery that seems short of what the season's harvest should reasonably have produced, the scribe answering with the calm patience of a man who has anticipated every likely question long before it was asked. A separate ledger tracks the cattle donated to the temple by wealthier households seeking the god's favor, animals that will eventually be slaughtered for offerings or distributed as payment to temple workers, and another still smaller scroll records the fine cloth produced by the weaving hall, destined partly for the god's own wardrobe and partly for sale or exchange in the wider market beyond the temple walls, since the temple, whatever else it is, also functions as one of the valley's largest and most stable economic institutions. Its storerooms and workshops sustaining not only its own considerable staff, but a meaningful portion of the surrounding countryside's material life as well. He walks the temple's working grounds at midday, past the weaving hall, where women work large upright looms, producing the fine linen the temple requires in seemingly endless quantity. The steady clack of wooden shuttles passing back and forth, creating a rhythm almost musical in its consistency. Several of the women humming quietly to themselves in time with their own work, a low unhurried melody that seems to rise and fall with no particular beginning or end, simply continuing the way the work itself continues, for as long as there is linen still to be made. Past the brewery, where beer is produced in vast quantities both for the god's offerings and for the wages paid to the temple's many workers, the air here thick with the warm, faintly sweet smell of fermenting grain. Several large ceramic vats standing in neat rows along the shaded wall, each one tended by workers who check them with the same unhurried, practiced attention the priest himself brings to his own daily rites, a different craft entirely, but built from the same underlying patience. He passes a small kitchen garden where onions and leeks grow in neat irrigated rows, tended by an old gardener who has worked this same small plot for so many decades that the priest suspects he could describe every handful of its soil individually if asked. The old man looks up as the priest passes, offers a small nod of greeting, and continues his slow methodical work along the row without further pause, a hand trowel moving steadily through the dark, well-watered earth, the two of them exchanging no words at all, none being necessary between people who have shared this same quiet daily proximity across so many years that a simple nod carries the full weight of a longer conversation. The sun by now stands high and fierce overhead, the kind of heat that empties the open courtyards of anyone without direct business there. And the priest, like everyone else with sense, retreats for the hottest hours into the deep cool shade of the colonnaded halls, where thick stone walls hold back the worst of the day's heat, the same patient way they held the night's warmth only hours before. In this quieter middle stretch of the day, he sometimes finds time to sit with the temple's small school, where a handful of young boys, sons of scribes and minor priests, are being taught the long and demanding discipline of reading and writing the sacred signs, tracing them again and again onto broken pottery shards until the shapes begin, slowly, to feel less like foreign symbols and more like an extension of the hand itself. The teacher, an older priest whose eyesight has begun to fail him for most other temple duties, but whose patience for this particular work seems only to have deepened with age, moves slowly between the seated boys, correcting a grip on a reed pen here, pointing out a sign drawn slightly too hastily there. His voice never rising above a calm, even murmur, regardless of how many times a single boy manages to repeat the same small error. One boy near the back, younger than the others, and clearly still finding the whole discipline more frustration than accomplishment, scowls down at his shard with the particular fierce concentration of a child determined not to be the last to finish. His tongue caught between his teeth, his reed pen gripped so tightly, his knuckles show pale beneath his skin. The priest watches him for a while without comment, remembering, as he watches, his own long-ago frustration with signs that refused, for what felt at the time like an unreasonably long stretch of his childhood, to arrange themselves correctly beneath his own hand. And remembering too the specific morning, arriving with no particular warning, when the frustration had simply lifted, when his hand had begun, almost of its own accord, to know what shape came next without his conscious mind needing to labor over the decision. He remembers, sitting among them now as an occasional observer rather than a teacher, his own years spent exactly this way. The aching hand, the frustration of a sign drawn slightly wrong for the 100th time, and the eventual, almost imperceptible shift when the sign stopped requiring conscious effort and simply began, one day without any specific moment of arrival, to flow. Watching these boys now, he feels less like an observer of their particular struggle, and more like a distant continuation of it, one further link in an unbroken chain of small aching hands slowly learning, generation after generation, to hold the same signs, the same words, the same accumulated memory of the God's house that he himself now carries forward every single morning behind that small sealed door. Later in the day, as the worst of the midday heat begins finally to loosen its hold, he passes near the hall where the temple's musicians and singers rehearse for the coming festival season, their voices rising and falling in slow, deliberate unison, accompanied by the soft percussive shake of sistra and the low, steady pulse of a hand drum. He pauses at the edge of the hall to listen for a while, unseen by the performers themselves, who remain fully absorbed in the demanding work of holding a long unison phrase, exactly in tune across every voice, the choir director occasionally stopping them mid-phrase to correct some small imprecision in timing, patient but exacting in a manner not unlike the priest's own exactitude within the sanctuary. The music itself, when it finally settles into a clean, fully unified phrase, carries a particular resonance in the stone hall that seems for a few brief moments to fill the entire structure with a single unified breath, and the priest finds himself standing motionless at the threshold rather longer than he had intended, caught by the same quality of total absorption he recognizes so well from his own daily rites, simply expressed here through voice and rhythm rather than through incense and gilded silence. The afternoon brings a second, smaller rite, less elaborate than the dawn ceremony, but no less exact in its requirements, and by the time this second offering has been completed and the day's temple business has largely wound down, the light outside has begun its long golden decline, the shadows of the great columns stretching now far across the forecourt's stone paving, the heat of the day finally beginning, gradually, to loosen its grip. He walks, in this quieter late afternoon hour, to a small terrace near the temple's rear wall that overlooks a narrow view of the river beyond the enclosure, a private indulgence he permits himself most days, when his duties allow it. The Nile from here appears as a wide, unhurried band of gold and green-brown, catching the lowering sun in long shifting streaks, small fishing boats moving across its surface with sails caught taut in the day's gentle current of wind, their outlines dark and simple against the brightness of the water behind them. Palm trees along the near bank sway with a slow, unbothered rhythm. And somewhere further off, indistinct with distance, he can hear the ordinary sounds of the cultivated land beyond the temple walls, a donkey's complaint, a child's distant laughter, the rhythmic creak of a shadoof lifting water from the river into an irrigation channel, a sound so constant across this landscape that it functions almost as another kind of heartbeat underlying the whole valleys. Daily life. He leans against the sun-warmed stone of the terrace wall, and lets his gaze follow one particular fishing boat for a while, watching two small figures aboard it working a net along the water's edge. Their movements, unhurried, practiced, entirely unconcerned with anything beyond the immediate task of the day's catch. Further along the bank, a woman kneels at the water's edge washing linen, beating it rhythmically against a flat stone, the sound arriving faintly across the water a moment after he sees her arm rise and fall. And beyond her still, a line of date palms marks the boundary, where the cultivated green finally surrenders to the pale gold of the desert beyond. A boundary so sharp in this valley that a person can stand with one foot in fertile black earth and the other almost in barren sand, the entire life-giving logic of this land visible in a single unbroken glance. He thinks, in these quiet minutes, of how many priests before him must have stood on this exact terrace at this exact hour, watching this same river under 1,000 slightly different skies, and of how the river itself has scarcely changed across all that watching, rising and falling each year in its patient accustomed rhythm, depositing its dark fertile silt across these same fields, regardless of which king currently claims the land, regardless of which priest currently tends the god's daily offering. There is something in this thought that settles him further into the terrace's quiet, a feeling less like insignificance than like a kind of relief, the relief of belonging to something considerably larger and more patient than his own single lifetime, a system of care and attention that will continue exactly as it has continued, regardless of whether he personally succeeds in performing every single rite with perfect precision, though he will, of course, continue trying to do exactly that for as long as he is able. A pair of white egrets lift suddenly from the reeds along the near bank, startled by something unseen, and wheel once above the water before settling again a short distance further along, and he watches this small, ordinary disturbance with the same unhurried attention he gives to everything else visible from this terrace. No particular thought attached to it beyond the simple pleasure of noticing. As true evening approaches, the temple's daily rhythm shifts once more toward closing rites, the great outer gates prepared for their nightly sealing. The last of the day's visitors and petitioners guided respectfully back out through the forecourt before the sun fully sets. Throughout the afternoon, a modest number of ordinary people from the surrounding town have gathered near the temple's outer forecourt, as they gather every day, hoping for some small blessing or intercession, bringing with them small offerings of their own, a handful of flowers, a modest jar of oil, occasionally a folded scrap of linen, bearing a hastily written petition for health or good fortune, and a junior priest stationed specifically for this purpose has spent the afternoon receiving these small offerings and murmuring the appropriate brief blessing over each, since the inner sanctuary itself remains forever closed to anyone outside the priesthood. But the god's wider favor, the temple has always taught, extends readily enough to reach even those who can never hope to stand where the priest himself stands each morning. He watches this quiet exchange for a while as the afternoon light lengthens, an old woman pressing a small clay lamp into the junior priest's hands with visible relief once the blessing has been spoken. A young mother holding her child slightly forward, as though the mere proximity of the temple's outer wall might itself carry some protective virtue. And he is reminded, watching them, of something an older priest once told him many years ago during his own training, that the grand architecture of pylons and columns, the vast painted halls, even the hidden sanctuary itself, all exist ultimately in service of exactly this small daily exchange, an ordinary person's ordinary hope, met with an ordinary, patient reassurance that the god's attention has not entirely passed them by. The priest returns briefly to the sanctuary's outer antechamber for a final evening rite, quieter and simpler than the morning's full ceremony, a closing of the day's attention rather than a fresh beginning. And once this last small duty is complete, his formal obligations for the day are finished. This closing rite requires no procession, no gathered offerings carried on trays, only the priest himself entering the antechamber alone, speaking a brief formula of thanks and continued protection over the sealed sanctuary door, and withdrawing again just as quietly, the whole act taking scarcely longer than the time required to walk the short distance there and back. And yet he has never once considered it any less essential than the elaborate morning ceremony, understanding it instead as the necessary and equally faithful counterpart to that opening act, the day's breath released as carefully as it was drawn in. Beyond the temple's high walls, the sound of the great outer gates being drawn closed for the night carries a deep, resonant finality, the heavy wood groaning briefly against its hinges before settling. And with that sound, the temple's public day is formally concluded, the boundary between the ordinary town beyond and the god's enclosed domain restored for the night, exactly as it is restored every single evening, without exception. He eats his own evening meal simply, bread and a portion of the same vegetables prepared for the god's offering, a small cut of meat, a cup of beer drawn from the temple's own brewery, taken quietly in the shaded colonnade near his chamber as the sky beyond the temple's walls deepens from gold to a soft rose violet, and finally toward the deep blue that precedes true night. A few of the other resident priests eat nearby, their conversation low and unhurried, touching briefly on the day's minor business, a delayed grain delivery, a question about which hymn the choir should prepare first for the coming festival, a mild complaint about the heat that carries no real weight behind it, since every person present has spent an entire lifetime accustomed to exactly this climate, and would likely find its absence more unsettling than its presence. The priest listens more than he speaks, content in this hour simply to let the day's accumulated small tensions, however minor, dissolve gradually into the easy rhythm of shared company and settling light. The stone around him, having absorbed the sun's heat all day, now begins its long, slow release of that warmth back into the cooling evening air, and he can feel it faintly, even through his linen garments. A gentle, residual warmth rising from the ground and the walls alike, as though the temple itself were exhaling after a long day's held breath. Bats begin to move in loose, erratic patterns above the forecourt as the last light fades, dipping and rising with a silent, precise agility. And somewhere beyond the walls, the town's ordinary evening sounds carry faintly across the enclosure, a dog barking twice and falling silent, the distant clatter of some household securing its animals for the night. A final burst of children's voices before being called firmly indoors. He walks a slow final circuit of the outer court before retiring, as he does most evenings, checking without any real expectation of finding fault that the day's closing has proceeded correctly. The gates sealed, the storerooms locked, the lamps in their designated niches lit and steady for the night ahead. The forecourt in this near darkness takes on an entirely different character than it holds during the bright business of midday. The towering columns now looming as deep silhouettes against a sky rapidly filling with stars. The great statues of past kings barely visible, except as darker shapes within the darkness, their daytime grandeur replaced by night with something closer to quiet. Watchfulness, as though they too were simply waiting, patiently, for morning. By the time full dark arrives, the temple has grown almost entirely silent again, its outer gates sealed, its courts empty of all but the handful of priests and attendants whose duties require their overnight presence. The priest returns to his small chamber, the same single oil lamp still burning faithfully in its niche, having been tended throughout the day by whichever junior attendant holds that particular rotation. And he settles himself onto his sleeping mat with the same unhurried care that has governed every other motion of his entire day. He lies for a while listening to the temple's night sounds, the faint creak of a wooden door somewhere in the outer court, the soft, irregular call of a nightjar somewhere beyond the enclosure wall, the ever-present, barely perceptible murmur of the river itself, carried faintly on the night air, present even here within the temple's thick stone walls. a sound he has come to think of. Across many years, as the actual voice of the land the temple was built to honor, patient and endless, and entirely indifferent to whether anyone remains awake to hear it. Stars have begun appearing beyond his small high window, and he watches them for a while without any particular purpose beyond the simple pleasure of watching, thinking, as he often thinks in these last waking minutes, of how many centuries of priests before him have lain in rooms very much like this one, watching very much this same patch of sky, performing very much these same daily rites, an unbroken chain of quiet, faithful repetition, stretching back further than any single memory could hope to reach. He thinks, drifting further towards sleep, of the small hesitation of the junior priest that morning over the 2 jars of beer, and finds himself hoping, in the vague, unfocused way thoughts arrive in this state, that the young man will grow steadily more confident across the coming seasons the way he himself once did, that he will eventually reach the point where the whole sequence of the morning rite no longer requires conscious recollection at all, but simply arrives, complete and correct, the way a familiar path arrives beneath familiar feet without any need to consciously watch each individual step. He thinks of the old gardener's steady hands in the dark earth, of the weavers humming without any particular tune, of the choir's long unison phrase finally settling into perfect alignment after so many careful corrections, of the old woman pressing her small clay lamp gratefully into a junior priest's hands. And none of these thoughts arrive with any urgency or narrative order, simply surfacing and dissolving again, the way small ripples surface and dissolve on the surface of a still pool, each one true, each one already beginning to soften at its edges into the deeper, wordless quiet that always precedes his own sleep. Somewhere beyond his chamber wall, he hears the soft, unhurried footsteps of the priest, whose rotation includes the overnight watch, making his own slow circuit of the temple's inner courts, checking, as the priest himself had checked earlier, that every lamp remains lit, every door properly secured, the whole sleeping structure held safely within that quiet vigilance, the way a sleeping child is held within a parent's watchful awareness, even during the parent's own rest. This overnight watch, too, is part of the temple's unbroken daily pattern, one more small link in the same long chain of faithful attention that the priest has given his entire adult life to maintaining, and there is a comfort in knowing it continues even now, even as his own particular contribution to that chain draws, for tonight, to its natural close. The lamp in its niche burns on steadily, unwavering, needing no attention from him now until morning, and he allows his eyes finally to close, his breathing slowing to match the same patient, unhurried rhythm that has carried him through every hour of this day, the washing, the walking, the small sealed door opened and resealed in near total darkness, the god's breakfast offered in total privacy, the accounts reviewed, the children practicing their signs, the golden river glimpsed from the terrace, the evening rite closing the day exactly as the morning rite had opened it. Tomorrow the entire sequence will begin again, precisely as it began this morning, precisely as it will continue tomorrow and every day after, for as long as the temple stands and the river continues its patient, unhurried course past its walls. And there is, in this final drifting moment, before sleep fully arrives, no anxiety in that repetition at all, only a deep and settled comfort, the particular comfort of a life built entirely around the certainty that some things, faithfully attended, will simply continue, morning after morning, exactly as they always have. The night deepens further around the sleeping temple, the stars overhead completing their own slow, unhurried arc, exactly as they have completed it every night since long before this temple's first stone was laid. And somewhere beyond the enclosure wall, the river continues its patient course toward the sea, carrying, as it has always carried, the quiet accumulated weight of every single night, just like this one. Every priest who has ever lain exactly here, listening to exactly these sounds. Every lamp that has ever burned low and steady through the dark hours, waiting faithfully for morning. Outside, the desert beyond the cultivated land holds its enormous, starlit silence. The temple's pale stone walls glowing faintly under the rising moon. And within those walls, in the small dark chamber, where a single lamp burns low and steady, the priest sleeps, his breathing as even and unhurried as the river itself, gathering, without any conscious effort. Exactly the quiet reserves of patience and attention that tomorrow's dawn, arriving as certainly as it has arrived every morning before, will ask of him once again.